Welcome back to Classified Files, the channel that declassifies the most astonishing, untold stories of military history. We often think of war as a clash of steel and firepower, of tanks, ships, and airplanes. But beneath that visible conflict, there has always been a second, invisible war, a war of signals, of codes, and of the electromagnetic spectrum. In this shadow war, victory and defeat are measured not in miles of territory, but in decibels, frequencies, and the capture of a single flickering signal that can change everything. Tonight, we go back to a moment of supreme crisis, when a nation's survival hung by a thread and the enemy seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to strike with pinpoint, devastating precision, even in total darkness. The conventional tools were failing. The experts were baffled. But one quiet, overlooked scientist, assigned to analyze the junk data from a new, buggy, and universally hated piece of technology, saw a pattern that everyone else had dismissed as random noise. His superiors called his theory a fantasy. His colleagues called it a career-ending obsession. But his pursuit of that failed signal led to a discovery that didn't just save his country from disaster. It fundamentally changed the future of warfare forever. This is the failed radar that saved Britain from disaster. Before we power up the transmitters, if you believe that the most critical battles are often the ones fought in secret, in laboratories and listening posts, by men and women whose names are rarely recorded, then I need you to join our intelligence network. First, hit that subscribe button and activate the notification bell. It's your clearance for all future declassified briefings. Second, hit that like button. It boosts our signal and helps these vital stories reach a wider audience. And finally, drop a comment down below. Let us know what country and city you're watching from. Our global network of history and technology enthusiasts is our greatest asset. All right, let's tune the dials. The year was 1940. The world was on fire. France had fallen, a staggering, catastrophic collapse that had left Britain standing utterly alone, a defiant, terrified island fortress against the seemingly invincible might of the Nazi war machine. The Battle of Britain was raging in the skies over the Channel, a desperate moment-to-moment struggle where the heroic few of the RAF, in their Spitfires and Hurricanes, were just barely holding back the daylight onslaught of the Luftwaffe. But as summer bled into autumn, the battle changed. The Germans, frustrated by the RAF's unbreakable resistance in the day, pivoted to a new, more terrifying strategy: the night blitz. The sirens began to wail over London, Coventry, Manchester, a nightly, soul-crushing chorus of terror, followed by the distant crump-crump-crump of high explosives and the roar of 1,000 fires. The Luftwaffe owned the darkness. They were bombing, not just indiscriminately, but with a precision that was chilling, impossible. In total blackness, through thick cloud cover, they were hitting their targets, factories, railway junctions, docks, with a navigational accuracy that baffled Allied command. How were they doing it? The conventional wisdom was that they were simply using dead reckoning, starlight, and maps, combined with the guiding light of the fires from the first wave of bombers. This was the theory held by Air Commodore Jeffrey Watson, a man of hard-nosed, practical, old-school RAF thinking. He was a pilot's pilot, a man who believed in the Mark I eyeball, in the skill of a man, not the gimmickry of a machine. He had seen the early flawed reports from the new, experimental RDF, range and direction finding systems, what we would come to call radar, and he was deeply skeptical. He saw them as a drain on resources, a boffin's fantasy. In a damp, cramped, temporary hut at a converted coastal radar station in Swanage, Dr. Alistair Finch felt like a man shouting into a hurricane. Finch was the opposite of Watson. He was not a warrior. He was a physicist, a quiet, meticulous, painfully shy man in his late 20s, seconded from the Cavendish Laboratory at Cambridge, a man who believed in numbers, in wave propagation, in the beautiful, cold logic of the electromagnetic spectrum. He was, in Watson's dismissive terminology, a boffin, and he had been assigned a job that was considered a professional dead end. Analyzing the noise floor of a new, deeply troubled, and universally hated piece of equipment, the AI Mark IV. AI, or Airborne Interception, radar, This was the failed radar. It was a bulky, primitive, 5-meter wavelength set, consisting of a heavy transmitter, a receiver, and a complex web of antennas, all crammed into the nose and wings of a Blenheim, or the new powerful Beaufighter. It was, by all accounts, a disaster. It was heavy, robbing the fighter of precious speed and maneuverability. It was notoriously unreliable, its vacuum tubes constantly blowing under the vibration of combat, and worst of all, its user interface was a nightmare. The operator, a separate crewman crammed into a dark, claustrophobic station, stared at two small green cathode ray tube displays, one showing range, the other relative bearing. But the blip of a target was almost impossible to find, buried in a constant, swirling, chaotic snowstorm of electronic noise, static, and, most frustratingly, massive, overwhelming clutter from the ground. The night fighter pilots loathed it. It was extra weight, extra complexity, and, in their opinion, completely useless. "It's junk, Reggie," one pilot had told Finch over a bitter cup of tea, using his informal name. "Absolute bloody useless junk. I spent half the night trying to tell the difference between a Heinkel and a bloody cow in a field. Most of us just turn the bloody thing off. It's easier to use your eyes." The program was on the verge of cancellation. Air Commodore Watson was its most vocal opponent. "We are wasting precious man-hours and resources on this death ray fantasy, gentlemen." Finch had heard him boom in a high-level briefing. "This AI radar is a failure. It is too noisy, too unreliable, and it has not, to date, been responsible for a single verified kill. We must scrap this program and put these valuable men and resources back into building more searchlights and training more cat's-eye pilots who can actually see in the dark." For Finch, this was a tragedy. He believed in radar, but he was just a junior physicist, assigned to the janitorial task of analyzing the noise. His job was to wade through the endless, frustrated after-action reports from the AI operators, to look at their logs of static interference and unidentified noise, and to write a report recommending better shielding, or different frequencies, or something, to make the blip clearer. It was the bottom of the barrel. So, night after night, Finch sat in his cold, damp hut, surrounded by stacks of greasy, pencil-scrawled logs. He was looking for patterns in the noise. He was a man obsessed with signal-to-noise ratios. And as he plotted the reports, a strange, impossible, electrifying pattern began to emerge. The noise, the interference the operators were complaining about wasn't random. It wasn't the fuzzy, chaotic crackle of atmospheric static. It wasn't the persistent, low-level grass of ground clutter. This was different. He isolated a series of reports from 43 Squadron. The operator, a Sergeant Davies, was a meticulous note-taker. 22:17, Davies had written, "Patrolling Sector Beta, heavy rhythmic hissing interference on 1 5-meter band. Constant, swamped scope. No contacts seen." 23:05, Patrolling Gamma. Hissing gone, scope clear. 23:20, re-entering Beta. Hissing returned. Same bearing, same strength. Had to reduce receiver gain to 0. Useless. Finch's blood went cold. He pulled more reports. From different nights, different pilots, but the same sectors. Over and over, when flying on specific headings, west of London, or approaching Coventry from the south, the AI radar, this failed piece of junk, was being overwhelmed by a loud, steady, directional buzzing or hissing. Finch grabbed a map of southern England and a protractor. He began to plot the bearings. He drew lines, faint pencil marks, from the patrol sectors, back towards the source of the reported noise. The lines. They weren't random. They weren't pointing all over the place. They converged. They crossed. They all pointed, with chilling mathematical precision, to one specific spot on the other side of the English Channel. A spot near Cherbourg, in occupied France. It's a beam," Finch whispered, his voice a dry croak in the silent hut. "My God, it's not noise. It's a signal. It's a radio beam, a navigation beam." His mind raced, the implications staggering, terrifying. The Germans weren't just lucky. They weren't just good navigators, they were cheating. They were riding a precise electronic highway through the sky, a beam of energy pointed directly from France to their targets in England. They weren't seeing the targets. They were just flying down this invisible electronic road, and when the signal stopped, or when a second beam from a different station crossed the first one, they just dropped their bombs. That was how they were hitting the factories, the docks. It was a system, a precise, targeted electronic bombing system. He realized with a jolt that the AI radar, the failed radar, wasn't a failure at all. It was an accidental success. Its flaw, its extreme unshielded sensitivity on the 15-meter band, the very thing that made it noisy and useless to the pilots, was precisely what made it the only piece of equipment in all of Britain that could hear this German beam. It was a happy, brilliant, world-changing accident. The AI radar wasn't just a poor-quality plane finder. It was a perfectly designed beam finder. He had to tell someone. He ran, his charts clutched in his hand, through the rain-soaked darkness to the office of his direct superior, Dr. Abercrombie, the head of the Swanage Research Group. Abercrombie was a cautious man, a good scientist, but a man terrified of the military brass, terrified of Air Commodore Watson, terrified of being wrong. Finch burst in, drenched, manic, his eyes wild. "Sir, I found it! I found it! The noise! It's not noise! It's a beam, a German navigation beam. They're guiding the bombers. Look." He spread his map, his data, his logs, across Abercrombie's desk. "It's all here, the bearings. They all converge. Right here, in Cherbourg. The AI radar, the one they hate, it's detecting it. We can hear them." Abercrombie stared at the map, at the frantic pencil lines, at this wild-eyed, rain-soaked junior physicist who looked like he'd just seen a ghost. He looked pitying. "Reginald," he said, his voice the smooth, placating tone one uses on a hysterical child. "Get a grip on yourself. You're overtired. You're seeing patterns in the static." "No, sir, the math is sound. The bearings are consistent over weeks of data." "It's impossible, Poole," Abercrombie snapped, his patience breaking. "You're a noise analyst, not an intelligence officer. You're telling me the Luftwaffe is so stupid they're broadcasting their attack plans on a frequency our own fighters can pick up? It's absurd. It's noise, sunspots, atmospheric ducts, a flaw in the Mark V's receiver. It is not a secret German death ray." He stood up, gathering Finch's precious papers. His map. "Your job, Dr. Finch, is to find a way to filter out this hissing, to eliminate it, so the pilots can find the bombers. Your job is not to invent conspiracy theories. This project of yours is rejected. Your findings are inconclusive. You will cease this line of inquiry immediately." He handed the papers back. "Now go get some sleep, man. You look dreadful. You've been working too hard on a failed program. Maybe I should request your transfer back to Cambridge. This war work. It's clearly not for you." He had been rejected, laughed at, dismissed as a hysterical, conspiracy-theorizing rookie. The most important intelligence discovery of the war was just noise. The humiliation was a physical thing, a burning, acid-hot flush that crept up Alistair Finch's neck and settled in his face, a mask of shame that felt permanent. He walked out of Dr. Abercrombie's office, the word "rejected" echoing in the sterile hallway, a final slamming door. It wasn't just that his theory had been dismissed, it was how. The pity, the casual, condescending, "You look dreadful," the suggestion that he, a man who had just uncovered the enemy's most critical secret weapon, was simply overtired. They had called his discovery noise, a conspiracy theory, a fantasy. And his orders, his direct, official, written orders, were to now go back to his hut and find a way to filter out the very signal that was guiding the Luftwaffe's bombers. He was being ordered to make his own technology deaf, to deliberately ignore the enemy's broadcast, to help them maintain their invisibility. It was an order of such staggering, suicidal stupidity that it bordered on treason. He stood in the cold, driving nighttime rain of Swanage, the flimsy, precious map clutched in his hand, the ink starting to run. He had a choice. He could obey. He could accept his failure, his rejection. He could go back to Cambridge, as Abercrombie had suggested, and live out the war in the quiet, safe, irrelevant world of academic physics, while London burned and Coventry was erased, and the experts like Watson and Abercrombie continued to blame it on bad luck and uncanny German navigation. Or he could commit an act of profound, career-ending, potentially jailable insubordination. He could trust his data. He could trust his crazy theory. He could prove them all wrong. Finch walked back to his hut, his decision made. The cold fury that settled over him was a new, unfamiliar, but immensely clarifying emotion. The fear was gone. The shyness was gone. The academic deference was gone. All that remained was the problem, and the truth. He locked the door. He did not go to sleep. And he did not, for 1 second, begin work on a filter. He began instead to work on an amplifier. His failed AI radar, the Mark IV, was the key. It was a clumsy, blunt instrument, a sledgehammer, that had accidentally heard the beam. But it was also a complex, high-power, active transmitting device, installed in aircraft and heavily scrutinized. He couldn't just modify it without raising 1,000 alarms. No, he needed something new, something clean, something dedicated. He needed to build a device whose sole, specialized purpose was not to find airplanes, but to find this specific beam. He needed to build a precision receiver, a beam finder. He returned to his official job as a noise analyst with a new, secret, predatory focus. His work became his cover. He began to requisition components, not from the aircraft maintenance workshops, but from the radio research labs, his requests buried in the convoluted, bureaucratic language of noise abatement circuitry testing. He needed high-gain vacuum tube amplifiers to test the signal-to-noise thresholds of potential atmospheric interference, he wrote. He needed precise, variable tuning capacitors to map the frequency drift of anomalous ground clutter signals. He needed directional loop antennas to isolate and vector source of local power grid interference. He was building his revolutionary receiver right under their noses, using parts they were giving him to build a filter that he had no intention of ever designing. He was a ghost in their machine, a saboteur in their own laboratory. He built the prototype in his small, damp, mildew-scented hut, working after midnight, the windows blacked out, the only light the dim, red glow of a dark-room bulb, his soldering iron hissing, filling the air with the smell of hot rosin and tin. It was an ugly, monstrous, haywire thing, a breadboard of components bolted to a piece of salvaged wood, its hand-wound antenna coils looking like a bird's nest. It was powered by a stack of heavy car batteries he'd borrowed from the motor pool, and its only output was a salvaged voltmeter and a headphone jack. It was a crazy inventor's box of junk. It was his hidden project, and he knew it was the most important piece of technology in all of England. But it was not enough. He could run it from his hut, yes. He could point his loop antenna out the window, and he could hear it, the faint, distant, steady dit-dit-dit-dit, or sometimes a steady, solid tone. The German beam, codenamed Nickebeam, knocked leg. As he would later learn, he could hear it. He could prove it was real, to himself. But to prove it to Watson, to the Admiralty, to the Air Ministry, he needed more. He needed a map. He needed to know exactly where it was pointing. And for that, he needed to get his receiver into the air. He needed a plane. He needed a pilot. This was the wall. He was a civilian, a boffin, a rejected, disgraced one at that. He couldn't just walk up to a Beaufighter pilot and say, "Pardon me, Flight Lieutenant, would you mind taking my illegal, homemade radio on your next patrol, in direct violation of your commanding officer's orders, to hunt for a secret German beam? That, my boss says, is a fantasy." He'd be in a straitjacket before he finished the sentence. He needed an ally, someone on the inside, someone who flew, someone who hated the noise as much as he did, but who was also smart enough to know it wasn't random. He went back to his logs, to the meticulous, frustrated reports from Sergeant Davies, the AI radar operator from 43 Squadron, the man who had written, "Hissing returned, same bearing, same strength." A man who logged data, a man who saw a pattern. Finch pulled every string he had, which was almost none, and got himself a 3-day pass to RAF Tangmere, the base where 43 Squadron was currently resting and refitting. He went there on a cold, windy afternoon, his box of junk tucked into a standard-issue briefcase, feeling less like a scientist and more like a spy in a cheap novel. He found Sergeant Davies in the enlisted men's canteen, a dark, smoke-filled room, drinking a cup of what looked like brown sludge. Davies was a wiry, sharp-eyed man in his late 20s, his face drawn with the permanent fatigue of a man who fought his battles at night, in the cold, staring at a flickering green line. "Sergeant Davies?" Finch asked, his voice awkward. "My name is Dr. Finch, from Swanage, the RDF research group. I read your reports. The ones about the interference." Davies looked up, his eyes narrowed, instantly suspicious. "Oh, yeah? The noise box? You the boffin they sent to tell us we're imagining it?" "No," Finch said, sitting down uninvited, his heart hammering. He opened his briefcase, just a crack. "I'm the one who's here to tell you you weren't imagining it, and that it's not noise." He looked around the canteen. It was mostly empty. He leaned in, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "Sergeant, what you were logging, that hiss, it's a German navigation beam. It's a radio highway, and they're using it to bomb Coventry." Davies just stared at him. His cynical, tired face didn't change. But his eyes sharpened. A beam," he said slowly, like the Lorentz system for blind landing. "Exactly like that," Finch breathed, immensely relieved the man understood the concept. "But 100 times more powerful. And not for landing, for bombing. The reason your AI set is so noisy is because it's the only damn thing we have that's tuned to the right frequency. It's accidentally intercepting their guidance signal. And my superiors. My superiors told me I was crazy. They told me it's atmospheric interference. They told me to write a report on how to filter it out." Davies let out a low, slow whistle. He looked around, then leaned in closer. "So they're not just good navigators, they're cheating." "Precisely," Finch said. "And I need to prove it. I can't get the proof from the ground. The signal is too weak, too directional. I need to get in the air. I need to fly into the beam. I need to map it." "You need a plane," Davies said flatly, the implication dawning, his face hardening again. "I need you, Sergeant," Finch corrected. "You're the best AI operator they have. You're the only one who meticulously logged the bearings. You know what it sounds like. I have this." He patted his briefcase. A prototype receiver, hand-built, tuned specifically to that frequency. It's 1,000 times more sensitive than your AI set. It has a directional antenna. It will let us hear it clearly. It will let us find its center. It will let us map the road. The request was monstrous. Finch was asking him to smuggle an unauthorized, unshielded, potentially dangerous piece of electronic equipment onto a front-line combat aircraft during a war, in direct violation of every rule in the RAF, on the say-so of a disgraced scientist he'd just met. It was insane. Davies looked at Finch, at his burning, intense eyes, at the cheap briefcase. He thought about the last 3 weeks of fruitless patrols, of sitting in the dark, freezing cold, staring at a scope full of useless noise, while the radio crackled with reports of bombs raining down on London, on his sister's neighborhood. He thought of the smug, dismissive pilots who called his AI set junk. He thought of that steady, directional, purposeful hiss, and the sick feeling in his gut that it was something important. "Finch," Davies said slowly, "if we're caught, it's not a transfer. It's a court-martial. For both of us. You know that, right? Treason, maybe. endangering an aircraft. I know, Finch said, his voice steady. Good. Davies stubbed out his cigarette. My pilot, Finch. Flight Lieutenant White. He's a cynical bastard. He hates boffins. He hates this radar. He hates everything. But he trusts me. I can get him to fly a calibration pattern for me. 1 hour. He won't ask why, as long as I sound like I know what I'm doing. He stood up. We fly tonight. Be at the hard stand for Beaufighter Tango 9 at 22:00. And for God's sake, Doctor, try to look like you belong. Finch sat there, his heart pounding so hard he thought it would break his ribs. He had his plane. He had his pilot, or his operator, which was even better. The conspiracy was real. That night, under the cover of a routine patrol, they took off. Finch was not on the plane, of course. He was huddled in a freezing, dark radio shack on the airfield, monitoring a second, identical receiver, his nerves shredded, praying. Davies was in the back of the Beaufighter, his own box of junk, plugged in, headphones on. The pilot, Chalky, White, was grumbling over the intercom. All right, Davies, what is this bloody nonsense? We're supposed to be hunting Huns, not flying in goddamn squares for your atmospheric hobby. Just a calibration, Chalky. Davies's voice, calm, professional. Just bear 030, straight and level. Trust me. They flew for 10 minutes into the black, empty sky. Finch listened to the static. Davies listened to the static. Then, in Finch's headphones, he heard it, faintly. The thin, reedy, dit. The beam. He heard Davies' sharp intake of breath over the radio link. Chalky, Davies whispered. All pretense gone. Turn port. Bearing 290. What? That's towards Cherbourg. Do it. The plane banked. And the signal in Finch's headphones. It got louder. Dit. Holy Mother of God. Davies's voice crackled, full of awe. It's a road, Finch. It's a bloody road in the sky. It's as clear as a bell. I'm on it. It's pointing. Jesus. It's pointing straight at Coventry. Finch sat back, the blood draining from his face, the briefcase heavy in his lap. The laughter, the rejection, the humiliation. It all vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying, absolute certainty. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't hysterical. He was right. The failed radar hadn't failed. It had talked, and he was the only one who spoke its language. The real battle, the battle to make the experts listen, was about to begin. The flimsy, pencil-drawn chart in Alistair Finch's hand felt heavier than a bomb. The flight log from Sergeant Davies was a holy scripture, a detailed second-by-second account of their flight, with signal strength readings, precise timings, and the pilot's course corrections. It wasn't a hiss, it wasn't noise. Davies, with a radio operator's trained ear, had identified it clearly. It's a signal, sir. It's Morse. On the left side of the beam, it's dits, faint but clear. Dit. We turn right, it fades, and a new signal comes in. Das, da. And in the middle, sir, in the middle, it's a solid, perfect tone, a steady, unwavering E. It's a road, Doctor. It's a bloody, invisible road in the sky, a mile wide, and the center is a solid line. It was a weaponized Lorenz blind landing system, a beam for navigation, Nicobine, just as Finch had suspected, but now confirmed, mapped in the air, by the very failed radar that was supposed to be filtering it out. The implications were staggering. The Luftwaffe wasn't just navigating to the general area of Coventry. They were being aimed at it, as if by a sniper's scope, able to fly in total blackness, in thick cloud, and release their bombs the second the equisignal tone stopped or a second. Crossbeam signal told them they were over the target. And Air Commodore Watson, Dr. Abercrombie, the entire Air Ministry. They were all blind, convinced it was just good piloting and sunspots. Finch and Davies met in the pre-dawn gloom, huddled in the back of the empty canteen at RAF Tangmere, the smell of stale beer and fear thick in the air. Davies looked like a man who hadn't slept in a year, his face pale, his hands shaking. "Chalky," he said, referring to his pilot, Flight Lieutenant White. He's terrified, not of the Germans, of us. He says he'll deny everything. He says if this gets out, we'll all be shot for treason, for flying an unauthorized experiment, for endangering an aircraft. He's right, isn't he, Doctor? Davies's bravado from the flight was gone, replaced by the cold, harsh reality of what they had done. They were an NCO and a low-level civilian scientist. They had just committed a profound act of insubordination, proving that their own high command was catastrophically, fatally wrong. Handing this data to Dr. Abercrombie was useless. He would bury it, and them along with it, just to save face. Handing it to Air Commodore Watson would be like handing a confession to their own executioner. "He is right, Sergeant," Finch said, his own voice quiet, but devoid of the tremor it had held just days before. The confirmation of the beam, the sheer, beautiful, terrifying elegance of the German system, had burned away his shyness, his fear, replacing it with a cold, hard, furious certainty. "We will be court-martialed, or worse, if we follow the rules." He looked at Davies, his gaze intense. "But last night that beam was pointed at Coventry. Tonight. Maybe it's Birmingham, maybe it's Manchester, maybe it's London. How many people will die tonight, Sergeant, while Dr. Abercrombie evaluates his position? How many cities will burn because we were afraid of a court-martial?" Davies stared at his hands, his knuckles white. "So what do we do, Doctor? What can we do? We're nobodies." "No," Finch said, a new cold, strategic light in his eyes. "We are the only two people in this entire country who know the truth. And that makes us the most important men in England right now." He rolled up the charts, the flight log. "We're not going to Abercrombie. We're not going to Watson. We're going over their heads. We're going to the very top." It was an insane gamble, a leap of faith based on a single whispered rumor, a rumor of a man, a fellow boffin, a young physicist like himself, who had the ear of Churchill himself, a man who ran a tiny, secret, and deeply unconventional intelligence unit, a man who was fighting his own war against the military establishment, a man who, it was whispered, believed in the possibility of German radio beams and was being mocked for it, just as Finch had been. His name was Dr. Reginald Jones. "We're going to London, Sergeant," Finch said, standing up, his cheap briefcase in his hand. "Now, we're going to borrow a staff car, and you're going to get us past the guards at the Air Ministry." Davies looked at him, at this quiet academic man who was suddenly talking about stealing a car and storming the Air Ministry. A slow, dangerous, almost manic grin spread across Davies's face. "Hell, Doc," he said, standing up. "I've always wanted to see what a staff car's engine can really do. Let's go." The drive to London was a frantic 70-mile race against time, a blur of rain-slicked roads, pre-dawn darkness, and military checkpoints. Davies, a man who had apparently missed his calling as a getaway driver, bluffed, bullied, and flashed his RAF credentials with such aggressive, sleep-deprived confidence that no one dared stop them. They arrived at the massive, imposing, sandbagged facade of the Air Ministry on Whitehall just as the city was stirring to life, a gray, exhausted, bomb-scarred giant. The lobby was a hive of activity, wafts and uniformed officers rushing about with files, the air thick with the smell of floor wax and impending doom. And it was here that their insane plan hit its first, inevitable brick wall, a massive, red-faced RAF police sergeant at the front desk, a man who looked like he ate junior officers for breakfast. "Appointment with Dr. Jones?" the sergeant boomed, looking at Finch's muddy shoes and Davies's rumpled, grease-stained uniform with profound suspicion. "Doctor who? Never heard of him. And you, Sergeant? You look like you've been sleeping in a ditch. Let's see your leave papers." They were trapped. They were AWOL, carrying unauthorized, top-secret intelligence, and about to be arrested in the very lobby of the building they had come to save. "Sir, it's a matter of urgent national security," Finch pleaded, his voice cracking, his previous resolve crumbling in the face of this bureaucratic titan. "Please, you must. You can tell it to the duty officer, sir, right after you tell him why you're absent from your post," the sergeant growled, reaching for his telephone. "Now, if you'll just—" "What in God's name is this racket?" The voice was sharp, aristocratic, and utterly exasperated. Finch and Davies turned. Striding towards them, his face a mask of irritation, was Air Commodore Watson himself, the very man who had dismissed the AI radar as junk, the man who embodied the old guard. He was flanked by two other grim-faced senior officers. Watson stopped, his eyes widening in disbelief as he recognized Finch. "Dr. Finch? You? What in blue blazes are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Swanage fixing my radars." This was it. The end. Court-martial. The Tower of London. Failure. Finch saw it all in a flash, and in that flash, something in him snapped. The fear, the deference, the lifetime of being a quiet boffin, it all burned away, replaced by a single white-hot, furious certainty. "Your radars aren't the problem, sir," Finch shouted, his voice echoing in the cavernous lobby, causing officers to stop and stare. "The noise is the problem, and it's not noise. It's a German radio beam. They're aiming their bombers." "Sir, they're using it right now, and I can prove it." "What?" Watson was so stunned by the outburst, the sheer insubordination of it, that he was speechless. "He's mad!" Abercrombie, who had been one of the men flanking Watson, sputtered, his face pale. "Doctor, I told you. You told me I was hysterical, sir." Finch shot back, turning on his old boss. "You told me it was sunspots." "Well, last night, Sergeant Davies and I flew in it. We mapped it. It's a road, a radio road, and it's aimed at Coventry." "You flew in it?" Watson finally found his voice, his face turning a deep, dangerous purple. "You took a serving NCO on an unauthorized test flight in a combat aircraft to chase your fantasy. Sergeant, arrest these men. They're saboteurs." The RAF police sergeant moved in, his hand on his holster. Davies tensed, instinctively moving in front of Finch. "Jeffrey, stand down." The voice was quiet, almost casual, but it cut through the lobby like a razor. It came from a man Finch hadn't even noticed, a young, slight, civilian-suited man who had been walking just behind Watson, looking utterly bored. He stepped forward. He was maybe 30, with a sharp, intelligent face, and eyes that seemed to be simultaneously amused and infinitely tired. "Jeffrey," the man said again, "you're making a scene, and this sounds interesting." He turned his gaze on Finch, a gaze so sharp, so penetrating, it felt like being X-rayed. "Dr. Finch, is it?" "Reginald Vance," he said, offering a slim hand. "Air Scientific Intelligence." Finch's heart stopped. Vance, not just a boffin, the man who reported directly to Churchill, the man who had been looking for this. You said, "A beam?" Vance asked, his voice low, intense. "You flew in it? You mapped it?" "Yes, sir," Finch said, his voice trembling. "Here, the data, the logs." He fumbled with his briefcase, his hands shaking so hard he could barely work the latch. "It's a Lorenz type, 1 5-meter band. The AI Mark IV is accidentally picking it up. It's directional, coming from Cherbourg, and it's pointing directly at the Coventry Industrial Center." Vance took the papers from Finch's shaking hand. He scanned them, his eyes moving with incredible speed. He saw Davies's flight log. He saw the bearings. He saw the DITA signal strength reports. He saw the map, with the lines converging, not on a vague area, but on a specific transmitter site. He looked up, his face pale, his eyes no longer tired, but burning. "Jeffrey," he said to the still fuming Air Commodore Watson, his voice now like chipped ice. "You will release these men into my custody, immediately. You will forget this conversation happened. And you," he turned to the desk sergeant, "will arrange a car to Bletchley Park, now." He turned back to Finch. "Doctor," he said, a thin, dangerous, almost joyful smile on his face. "You've just been promoted. You and I are going to have a very long talk. And then, We are going to teach the Luftwaffe how to get lost. The failed radar. The noise that was supposed to be filtered out had just become the single most important intelligence source in the world. The Battle of the Beams had begun. The car ride with Dr. Reginald Jones, not Vance as my previous excitement mistook. Jones, R.V. Jones, the young, brilliant, and already legendary head of Air Scientific Intelligence, was a blur of rain-slicked London streets, a journey from one world to another. We didn't go to Bletchley Park, not yet. We went to a nondescript, sandbagged office off Whitehall, a place that smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and an electric, crackling energy. It was the nerve center of the Battle of the Beams, a shadow war that, until this morning, I hadn't even known existed. The confrontation in the Air Ministry lobby had shattered my old reality. I had walked in as Dr. Alistair Finch, the failed, rejected, hysterical boffin from Swanage. I walked out as something else. I was the key. I was the man who had brought R.V. Jones the one thing he had been desperately searching for: proof. Jones, it turned out, had been chasing this very fantasy for months. He had suspected the Germans were using radio navigation, based on fragments of intelligence, on mathematical probability, on pure, brilliant intuition. But he had no proof, he had no signal. He, too, was being mocked by the established brass, by men like Air Commodore Watson, who saw his theories as boffin nonsense. And I, with my failed radar's logbooks, my crude map of converging bearings, and Sergeant Davies' first-hand account of the DITA signals, had just handed him the smoking gun. "They're not just conspiracy theories now, are they, Doctor?" Jones said, his voice quiet, almost purring, as he spread my map across his own, much larger, operations table. He was a man transformed. The bored, tired look was gone, replaced by a terrifying, predatory intensity. "They called me mad, you know," he mused, tapping the point in Cherbourg. "Watson, Abercrombie, the lot of them. They insisted the Luftwaffe was just better at navigation." He looked at me, a thin, dangerous smile playing on his lips. "Well, it's rather hard to argue with a flight log. Sergeant Davies," he added, "is a bloody hero. And so it seems are you. And so is your failed AI Mark IV radar." The validation was so profound, so sudden, it almost made me dizzy. But Jones wasn't done. He wasn't a man who savored victory. He used it. "Right," he said, suddenly all business. "They've rejected you. They've rejected me. And while we've been arguing, Coventry is, or was." He didn't need to finish. The devastating raid on Coventry, which had left the city a smoldering medieval ruin, had happened just nights before. My beam finder theory, had it been accepted, might have... I couldn't go there. "We have the what?" Jones said, his voice like chipped ice. "We know where it's coming from. We know how they're doing it. Now, how do we break it?" This was the new problem. My box of junk receiver, my prototype, was a listener. It was a diagnostic tool. It wasn't a weapon. We could jam it, sir," I offered, the obvious brute force solution. "Blast the frequency with our own noise? Scramble the signal?" "No," Jones said instantly, shaking his head, already 10 steps ahead of me. "Crude, inelegant, and worse, obvious. We start jamming, they know we've found them. They'll just switch frequencies. They'll change the modulation. They'll change the system. We'll be blind again, in a week. No, Doctor, we can't let them know we can hear them. We can't just block the road." He leaned in, his eyes gleaming with a kind of brilliant, amoral cunning. "We have to move it." I stared at him. "Move? The road?" "Precisely," Jones whispered. "The beam, the equisignal, Davies's report. It's a Loren system. A DIT signal on one side, a DA signal on the other. Where they overlap, the pilot hears a steady, on-course tone. He follows that tone. And it leads him, like a mythical siren, right to the Rolls-Royce factory in Coventry." He tapped his finger on the map. "But what if? What if we didn't jam it? What if we lied to it?" My mind, the physicist's mind, leapt to the solution. The idea so audacious, so simple, so beautifully devious, that I laughed, a short, sharp bark of pure exhilaration. "Of course," I breathed. "We don't transmit noise. We transmit DITs. We build our own transmitter, here in England. We listen for their DA signal, and in that same DA zone, we transmit our own, slightly stronger, DIT signal on the exact same frequency. And vice versa." Jones finished, his smile matching mine. "We transmit DAs in their DIT zone. We don't block the beam, we bend it, we confuse the equisignal." The German pilot following his perfect, solid, on-course tone. "He's not flying towards Coventry anymore. He's flying towards a new, false beam, a phantom beam that we are creating. We can. We can steer them. We can make them drop their bombs. 10, 20, 50 miles off target, into an empty field, into the bloody ocean." It was genius. It was pure electronic warfare judo. We would use the enemy's own signal, his own strength against him, and he would never even know he'd been fooled. He'd fly home, convinced he'd just bombed a factory, his navigation perfect, while in reality he'd just cratered a sheep pasture. But the how was still a nightmare. "We need transmitters," I said, my mind racing. "Powerful ones. We need to build them now, and we need to know exactly what frequency the beam is on every night. It could change." "Indeed," Jones said, "which is where your failed radar comes back in. The AI Mark IV, the Pariah, the Junk, was now the most critical piece of intelligence hardware in Britain. We couldn't risk putting my box of junk receiver in every night fighter. But the existing, failed AI radars, they were already there. They were the perfect, deployed, wide-area listening network. "Watson wants to filter the noise," Jones said, his voice dripping with contempt. We'll amplify it. We'll issue a new, top-secret directive. AI calibration procedure. Every night fighter patrol, every AI-equipped bow fighter, their primary mission is no longer to hunt bombers they can't find. Their primary mission is to find the beam, to log its frequency, its bearing, its pulse rate, the junk data that Abercrombie and Watson dismissed. It's about to become the most important signal in the war." And so began the Battle of the Beams, a frantic, secret, high-stakes race against time, fought in damp Nissen huts, in secret laboratories, and in the freezing dark cockpits of RAF night fighters. I was no longer a rejected physicist at Swanage. I was plucked from my exile, transferred to Jones's clandestine Air Scientific Intelligence Unit, given a rank I didn't understand and security clearance that made my head spin. I became, overnight, the lead boffin in charge of beam countermeasures, codenamed Aspirin, because it was the headache cure for the Blitz. We worked with a desperation I had never known. While London burned, while the sirens wailed, my team, a hand-picked group of radio engineers, physicists, and crucially, Sergeant Davies, who was seconded from his squadron as my chief technical operator, scrambled to build the counter-transmitters. We didn't have time for proper procurement. We stole. We liberated a massive high-power medium-frequency transmitter from a depot that was supposed to be shipping it to the BBC for propaganda broadcasts. We modified it, hand-winding new coils, rebuilding the RF amplifiers, pushing it up into the 30 megahertz band that Nicobine used. It was a crude, brutal, hay-wired monster, a thing of glowing tubes and sparking relays, housed in a secret, camouflaged van on a hilltop in Kent. Davies, with his golden ears, was the key. He would sit, headphones clamped on, fine-tuning my receiver, listening for the German beam. "Got it, Doctor." He'd yell, "He's on 31, 5 megahertz, standard DIT-DA pulse, bearing, 245 degrees. He's pointing at the Bristol airfields tonight." Then it was my turn. "Right," I'd say, my own hands shaking. "Engage Aspirin, transmit countersignal, phase, 180 degrees. Let's bend it south." I'd throw the main switch. The generator outside would groan. The lights in the van would dim, and a massive silent lie would begin to pour out of our antenna, screaming across the channel. A phantom beam, designed to intercept the German bombers, to grab their receivers, and to subtly, gently, steer them away from Bristol and towards the empty, dark expanse of the Salisbury Plain. The test came on a cold, clear night in November 1940. A massive raid was detected forming over Cherbourg. The Nicobine beam snapped on, clear and strong, aimed directly at the industrial heart of Birmingham. In the Air Ministry's underground war room, Air Commodore Watson was grim, predicting a catastrophe, scrambling his ineffectual night fighter squadrons to patrol over the city. In our secret van, R.V. Jones stood behind me, his arms crossed. Watching. "They're on the beam, Doctor," Davies reported, his headphones clamped tight. "Heinkel's, dozens of them, following the tone, steady as she goes." "Turn it on," Jones said quietly. I threw the switch. The van filled with the hum of high voltage. "Counter signal is Liv," I reported, my mouth dry. "Bending. Bending, beam 5 degrees east." In the main war room, the plots from the coastal radar stations started to come in. The first wave of bombers crossed the coast and turned. A slight, almost imperceptible deviation from the expected flight path. Watson reportedly dismissed it. "Navigation error, they'll correct." But they didn't correct. They kept flying, steady, confident, on their new beam. On my beam. They flew straight past Birmingham, their bomb bay doors opening, and they unloaded thousands of pounds of high explosives onto an empty, muddy swamp in Lincolnshire, 50 miles away from the nearest factory. The reports from the Observer Corps were pure, unadulterated confusion. "Massive bombing raid in progress. Target, unknown. Appears to be a field." Jones in our van listened to the report, and a slow, cold, beautiful smile spread across his face. He looked at me, at the rejected scientist, the hysterical boffin. "Well, Dr. Finch," he said quietly, "it seems your noise just saved a city." The failed radar had just won the first decisive battle of the Invisible War.